The foundation of every great mix is the low end, and Logic Pro has some incredible tools for shaping that. Getting the low end right early on is crucial to setting up the rest of the mix, because if the kick and the bass don't feel solid, then it doesn't really matter what we do to everything else in the mix. The whole track is always going to feel weak and lacking in depth. Now, I've mixed thousands of tracks over the years, and whether I'm mixing a dance tune that has to hit hard on massive club PA systems, or I'm mixing something softer and more indie pop like this track, it's always crucial to get the foundations of the mix right first before we build on top. So today I'm going to show you 3 tools that I use for shaping the low end of my mixes in Logic Pro. These tools are kind of hidden away if you don't know about them, but you'll see what a massive difference they can make. Even just by using small amounts of them can completely transform the feeling of your mix. So this is the 4th video in the series where I'm mixing this track, Say It by Kate Lomas, completely from scratch using nothing but the tools available to us in Logic Pro. And this is because we're focusing much more on mixing with feeling and emotional intent rather than getting bogged down in technical details around plugins and super specific mix techniques. If you've been following along with the series so far, then thanks so much for being here. If you're just joining us for episode 4, then you can catch up with the rest of the series on the playlist below. Now, last week we built the static mix just using the volume faders and the VCAs. There's no processing or no panning going on. All we have is a bit of tape delay on the drum bus here, and then this vintage Vox vocal rack that I'm using here as a placeholder just to build the rest of the mix around. So let's take a quick listen to where we left off last week, and then we'll talk about where we're going to go from here.
Take a ride, Monday night, and I'm a train wreck. The summer sings and I'm alive, but I'm still holding on. You went away, but can you call me when you get there? I'm a little out of sync, and all my words come out wrong. Oh, say it like you mean it.
So in episode 1, we made a plan and a roadmap for this mix. And in that roadmap, I said that I want the song to feel like we're driving through summer. That's what I want the mix to reflect. I want it to feel warm, and I want the groove to be central to the feeling of this mix. And so much of the groove in this song comes from the kick and the bass and the relationship between the bass part and what the drums are doing. Now, this song is dead simple. It's quite a soft and dreamy indie pop thing, so it would be inappropriate of me to engineer some huge, gigantic kick drum sound and thundering sub bass. But what's currently there is sounding a bit weak. I want the kick and the bass guitar to be much more cohesive and feel like one part that's driving the song along. And I want to just feel the low end a bit more. I said I wanted it to feel warm and kind of soft, and a big part of that, I think, is having that sort of soft, pillowy low end that feels thick and warm and supports the rest of the track. This is how we're going to do that. We're going to start with the kick drum. So the kick drum currently sounds a bit flappy and a bit boring if we listen to it on its own. Like, it's fine, but it just sounds like a raw kick drum. There's no depth to it, and it's not really giving us that sort of soft, warm feeling that I want. The first thing to do, though, as I always say, is to correct any issues. And there's a bit of bleed coming through from the snare drum into that kick mic. And I just want to clean that up, because if we're adding low end and we're enhancing the low end of this kick drum, I don't want to start adding and enhancing low end on the snare bleed as well. So we're just going to clean that up quickly with a noise gate. I'm just going to add in the basic noise gate in Logic, and we'll just dial this in until it sounds a bit cleaner. Okay, so now I've cleaned it up. What I want to do is start shaping the tone of this kick drum so it's more in line with the feeling that we're after with this song. And I want to utilize this sub kick track and these kick samples that I demonstrated in episode 2 when I showed the template here. I want to start to use some of these features that are in the template. And in order to do that, the first thing that I need to do is convert this kick drum, this live kick audio, which has been recorded from a proper drum kit with a microphone, I want to turn that into MIDI. And I can do that just by pressing Control-D on the keyboard. And that's going to bring up the drum replacement and doubling feature. And basically what this does is it allows us to convert this audio signal into MIDI and then use that MIDI to trigger a kick sample. You can see it's created these MIDI notes down here. That all looks pretty clean. It's triggering all the right notes. We can just go ahead and hit OK. If you've got something a bit more complicated, often you need to dial the threshold in a bit more detailed. But this is so simple that it just works straight off the bat. So we're going to hit OK, and that's going to double that kick drum track with this MIDI. And you'll hear this is just triggering this acoustic kick C1. But that sounds kind of crap. It's not really what I'm after. What I'm going to do as well is increase the velocity of this to make sure that it's hitting it at a good level. But that's not really the kind of kick drum sound that I want. It's a bit too rocky and it's not appropriate for the feeling of this song. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this MIDI region up to this sub kick track here, and then I'm going to get rid of that kick track that's just been added. Now on this sub kick track, let's close the library. If I open this instance of the drum synth, you'll see I have here this kick drum set up. And basically what this is doing is synthesizing a kick drum. And what that's going to do is give us that subby low end that's going to support the whole drum kit and really help enhance the groove and the downbeat in this song. So let's take a listen to what this sounds like on its own. So as it is, if I blend this in with the kit, it's probably going to sound a bit heavy. You can hear even just that in its default state is adding quite a lot of weight to the kick drum and the low end in the drum kit immediately. What I'm after, if we think about our intention and the feeling that we're trying to set out, is not to have a big thundering 808 kick drum sound. It's just to have this sort of subby, soft thing that maybe doesn't have a lot of attack and isn't particularly long, just sits underneath the kit and sort of supports it and give the kick drum more weight. That's all I'm after. Just a bit more of a sort of thickness and roundness to the low end in the kick drum. I don't want something which is pounding heavy in your face kick drum. So let's try and dial something in just in solo and see if we can shape the tone, and then we'll listen to it in context and tweak it even more. Now, one thing to bear in mind here is the decay, because your monitors may not reproduce the low end enough to hear just how long this is going on for. So you can actually just sense check how long this subkick is lasting by dialing in a bit of saturation. The length and the tail of this subkick becomes really obvious, and then you can get the timing right and then dial back the saturation. So that sounds much cleaner. I don't want this long tail that's going to be sort of swallowing up all the low end in the track. And then in the context of the mix.
Take a ride Monday night and I'm a train wreck. The summer
Yeah, that's adding so much weight. Let's just check the phase of this. Let's bring in the gain plugin and invert the phase and just see if it makes any difference to the tone of that subkick. Yeah, cool. That feels good to me. That's adding a nice soft weight to that kick drum without making it sound too punchy or too much like a kind of obnoxious EDM kick drum. I think that adds a nice soft weight, which is perfect for the feeling of the track. Now, I know there's some people right now who are dying to talk about drum phase alignment and shouldn't you be phase aligning your drums and bouncing everything and aligning everything manually or using auto align. But I don't want to do that because I don't need to do that in this song. That's not the feeling of the song. The only reason that I would phase align drums is to make them as punchy as they can possibly be. So if I'm working on a track where, say, it's a big punchy pop tune or kind of indie rock thing where the drums are like really energetic and I want the drums to cut through in the mix, then I would think maybe about phase aligning them to make sure they're as punchy as they can possibly be. But in this case, that's not the feeling that I'm going for. I don't want punchy drums. The drums are just supposed to support the groove and sit in the back of the mix and just drive the song forward. I want them to be soft and round and warm. I don't want them to be punchy and edgy and have really strong phase-aligned transients that are going to cut through the mix. That's not the feeling of the song. So if anyone's thinking, why are you not phase-aligning your drums? That's why, because I don't need to. It's just a waste of time, and it's not going to give me the feeling that I want. Now, one of the things I mentioned a few times, I talked about it earlier on, and I mentioned it in last week's episode as well, is the downbeat in this song and how crucial it is to the groove. and emphasizing the pocket in this groove. Last week I showed this overhead hi-hat sample and how that's used to accent that downbeat, but I feel like we can also do a little bit more with the kick drum just to give a bit of emphasis to it without making the kick drum too punchy. And that's where these samples come into play. I'm going to drag this kick now up to this dog kick sample, which is a sample of my dog headbutting my phone camera that I transformed into a kick drum. We're just going to try some of these different samples and see what they sound like. They might not be appropriate, but let's just see what they sound like. I kind of like what that radioactive kick's doing. Let's just get rid of those other two for a second. Yeah, that's cool. I think it's adding a nice emphasis. One thing I would say is I mentioned before when we were talking about the roadmap for the song that I didn't want the drums to be too bright. I want them to just sit behind everything else and for the top end really to come from the vocals and the little sparkly stuff, but not from the drums and the cymbals. So I'm also going to try just adding an EQ to this. Let's turn the tape delay back on so that we're getting the groove right with that radioactive kick in. And then let's add an EQ to the drum bus. So this time we're just working on the whole drum bus. Let's take a listen to what this sounds like if I just dial away some of that top end. That's cool, you know, that radioactive kick is just doing something very subtle to give a little bit more on that downbeat. And then this EQ feels like it's really helping the drums to sit behind everything. And it gives more clarity to the whole mix because I'm not focused on that hi-hat that's happening sort of kind of constantly. All right, I think that's feeling pretty good for now. I mean, this is all very fluid and it's all going to change as we go. And we should be just really treating this as the foundations and the building blocks for the rest of the mix. All of this stuff will be tweaked as we build the mix. But it's feeling good and I feel like we're honoring the intentions of the song and the mix as we planned in the first place. The low end is deeper, but it's soft, it's pillowy, it's not this big punchy thing. So it's feeling good. I think we're on the right track. Now let's take a look at the bass guitar in this song. So the bass currently is just this very simple DI'd bass signal, which sounds like this. It's kind of fine. I like the rawness and the dryness of it, of that sort of DI'd signal. I think it suits the style of the song. But I feel like it's also a bit uninspiring and it can be thicker and it can be smoother, I think, in its tone. And again, have more low-end weight to it to really help the groove and support the rest of the song. So what I'm going to do is keep this DI track because I like the DI sound. Like I say, it's pretty good, but it just needs a bit of help. So we're going to call it bass DI. And we're going to duplicate this and we're going to call this bass amp. And then I'm going to bring this down onto this track here. Let's just mute that DI signal for the time being. And then what I'm going to do is go to the bass amp designer. Now the bass amp designer in Logic is really cool. I think it actually sounds pretty good for a stock bass amp designer. It's good. It stands up against some of the like quite expensive amp emulations that I've come across in the past. I think it's good, even just in its default state. It's very flexible as well. We have all these different amp models. A lot of people don't actually spend any time playing around with these, but I really like this flip-top sound. Now that's pretty cool sounding. I mean, we're not listening in context at the minute, so it's difficult to say for sure. But where this really comes into its own and where the power is in this bass amp emulator is in this direct box down here. If we move the blend control, so this is a blend control between this amp and this direct box. If we move this over fully direct, bring the output down because it gets a little bit hot, and play around with these. Six is cool. 2 is usually my favorite. I like 6, that's kind of cool, but I think that might be a little bit too bright for this kind of song. Let's hear it in the context of everything else. Let's just hear it first with the other DI signal. Probably 6 is probably just an extension of what's already there, so that might not be the right thing. We want something with a bit more contrast. Let's go back through them, but this time we'll listen in context of the mix. Three immediately feels good there, but there's some kind of strange harmonic happening. I think with this EP riff. There's some like harmonic overtone there that just feels a bit clashy. Notice how without this direct box in the bass amp designer, that bass part just disappears. It gets completely lost, it falls away. One thing I think it could use is a little bit more dynamic consistency. At the minute, it feels a little bit loose and a little bit raw, and I think if we add a bit of compression to it, we can sort of lock it into the pocket in that groove with the drums. So what I'm gonna do is send these to a summing stack or a bus, and we're gonna call this bass guitar, and then let's make it mono because it's a mono signal. Then let's add a compressor to this. Now, the Logic compressors are really good for bass. There's a couple of different ones that I really like, which is the Vintage FET, which is an 1176 style, and Vintage Opto, which is an LA2A style. But I pick and choose on these depending on the feeling of the mix. And this is what I keep coming back to this thing about. You've got to choose things based on the feeling that you want to create. This Vintage FET model is like my go-to for something that's a bit more aggressive. And if I want the bass to feel like super tight and compressed and really cutting through and driving, but in a more aggressive way. Whereas this, although the song is driving and although I want the groove to be driving, the bass part itself is not this ding, 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 ding kind of driving thing. It's actually just sitting back and supporting the rest of the mix. So I want something softer and something smoother. And the Vintage Opto is probably the place to start with this. So let's take a listen to what that sounds like in solo and see if we can just dial something in. I'm going to start around about 4:1 ratio. Let's start with a medium-ish attack and then just leave the release on auto for now for this kind of thing. And let's also put in this soft distortion circuit because this adds a really nice thickness to the bass as well. Let's take a listen to what this is doing. Right, let's hear that with the drums a sec. That Vintage FET is way too fast. It's just killing all the transient. quite subtle, but it's adding something. It's making the bass feel a little bit more cohesive. It's gluing it together a little bit more. I'm not looking for super compressed sound. I just want something that, like I say, locks in with the drums a bit more and just solidifies that bass tone. And I think that's doing a really good job of doing that. Now, while we're on the subject of compression, I know there's going to be people saying, shouldn't you be sidechaining your bass guitar to your kick drum using a compressor and using sidechain compression to duck the bass guitar every time the kick drum hits so that the kick drum has more clarity and you really hear the low end? What I would say to that is I'm actually not looking for super clarity between the kick drum and the bass guitar. We can try this to see what it sounds like, but I want the bass and the kick to feel kind of like one thing that sort of merged together. I'm not necessarily looking for super separation between the two things. As I keep talking about, the thing in this mix is the downbeat. It's not the kick drum or the bass guitar necessarily. They're kind of playing the same role in the song. They're just part of the percussive groove. The bass line is not particularly melodic. It just moves between two chords and it follows the kick drum. So really, the bass guitar part in this song is just an extension of the kick drum. So I don't want the two things necessarily to feel like two separate things. I'm not looking for clarity and punch in the kick drum. I'm looking for this soft, thick, warm low end. And I think you achieve that by sort of making the two things clash together a little bit more rather than creating separation. Let's try it though, and let's just see what effect it has. So I'm going to use the Platinum Digital compressor because I quite like that for this sort of thing. It doesn't really add any character or anything. It's purely just ducking. Audio sidechain is the kick drum, and then let's set to like 3-1 or something and set the release quite fast. Set the attack quite fast, sorry. The release pretty fast as well. Let's just see what that sounds like with the drums and the bass together. So immediately, straight away, it's changing the groove of the bass and it's changing the feel of the song. All of a sudden, this downbeat that I keep talking about has now been separated and there's kind of two things happening there. The kick drum is happening and it's ducking the bass. So rather than the groove being doom, 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 it's now going doom, boom, 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 which is changing the feeling of the song in a way that for me, doesn't feel right. Let's see if we can just focus in on the low end specifically. Let's go to the sidechain filter, low pass it. Oh God, that's going crazy. Low pass it to, let's say 130 or 150-ish hertz. Let's see what that sounds like. It sounds so much worse to me with that sidechain compression on. As soon as I disable it, I'm like, that low end is cohesive. The kick and the bass kind of come together in it and it fits in the pocket and it sounds how it should. When I engage it and we create separation between those two things, it just falls apart and it changes the feeling and it feels awkward. And this is a really good example of how maybe YouTube mixing tutorials particularly have influenced people in a way that they feel now that they should be doing something because it seems like the technical thing that you should be doing. And they're not really giving any context or really thinking about the feeling of the song. So you might sit down to mix and think, well, I saw that, I should use sidechain compression on my bass because then it creates separation between the kick drum and the bass guitar. And that's what I should be doing in my mix. But sometimes you don't want to do that. That's not appropriate for the feeling of the song. It doesn't mean that it's wrong to use sidechain compression on a bass. There are times when it's completely necessary and I will use it. But it's not always the right answer because it's not always what the song calls for and it's not always what the feeling of the mix needs. And this is a really good example of that. This mix, as I keep saying, I don't want separation in the low end. I want it to feel like one sort of gluey thing that all sticks together. And the sidechain compression, yes, is giving more clarity to the kick drum, but it's making the feeling of the song worse. And it's taking away from the plan that I set out in the beginning. And that's why it's really important to make sure that all of these things and all of these technical things that you learn and that you hear about, if you're going to use them, you're using them consciously because they're enhancing the feeling of the song, and things like the groove and the vibe and the emotion in the mix are being enhanced by using those technical things, not compromising the feeling of the track because you're just using techniques that you heard you should use. Okay, last trick, and this is a bit of an unusual one, but we're going to use Fat Effects, which is my favorite plugin In Logic Pro, I've talked about this plugin so much. If you've been following my channel, you'd have heard me yapping on about Fat Effects plenty of times because this plugin is great. And we're going to use it in a bit of a unique way to do one very specific thing, just to finalize the sort of low end shaping of this mix. So I'm feeling at the minute like we've done a really good job of adding that subby extension to the drums and the bass guitar, which has given the mix a lot more depth, and this roundness, which is really nice and supports the rest of the track. But in doing that, we have lost a little bit of punch. And although I'm not after a punchy drum sound in this song, it is important that they still have a little bit of emphasis in the right areas to make sure that they cut through on smaller systems and stuff, and just so that we continue to support that groove, because the groove is such an important part of the driving feeling of this song. So I just want to add a little bit more punch to the drums now. So I've got this instance of Fat Effects on the drum bus, and we're in its default state. If you're not familiar with Fat Effects, I recommend going and checking out some of my other videos on this plugin, because I use it for all kinds of different stuff. The distortion modules I talk about a lot because they're just great for adding character and saturation, but that's not what we're going to use it for today. What we're going to use is this bandpass section over here and this bass enhancer and maybe a bit of the compressor. But the first thing that I'm going to do is turn on this bandpass over here. And this is basically just a bandpass filter that allows us to filter both ends of the frequency spectrum. So I'm just going to do some filtering on these drums, and I'll explain what I'm doing once I've done it. So what I'm doing here is just focusing on where the punch is in these drums. And you can use these resonance controls to add a bump at either end of the filter. So like 40-ish hertz, we're adding a bump, and then we're adding a bump again around about 190, 200 hertz. And then what I'm going to do is where I've pushed those little pockets in the frequency spectrum, I'm going to blend this back in with the reject mix. And what this reject mix does is it blends back in the signal either side. And then let's add some bass enhancement to this. And then maybe some compression. So now it's like resonant and kind of slamming a bit, but we can use this master mix control now to blend that back in with the original drums. Let's hear that in the mix. And that's a really great way of adding punch and emphasis to the drums, just blending it in a little bit more. And you can obviously crank this to taste. You could dial in some saturation if you wanted. You can push this even further, be really extreme with it, but I didn't think it needs it. This song just needed a little bit more emphasis on the kick and the snare, just to make sure that the groove is not getting lost behind everything else, particularly where we've added that weight to the bass drum. And this is a really good way of doing that. All right, so we've added some sub to the kick drum with this sub kick track in the mix template. We've added some extra weight and thickness to the bass guitar using this bass amp simulator and the direct box specifically in this. And then we've added some extra punch and emphasis to the drums using this instance of Fat Effects blended in. Let me just play the mix back now with the vocal in, and I'll mute the things we've added. And you can hear what a difference they've made to the feeling of the mix.
Take a ride Monday
That's added so much weight and so much extra low depth to this mix, and it's given us a really good platform to build upon. Some of this is a bit strong, like there's maybe a bit too much low end at times, but this is just the building blocks for the rest of the mix. All of this will change as we bring stuff in, we start to shape things, we bring a lot of that stuff down and fine tune it and refine it. Obviously, I'm pushing it a bit further for demonstration purposes as well, so you can see what a difference these things make. But we will tuck a lot of this in as we go and refine that low end later down the line. We're not asking for it to be perfect right now. We just want more weight and more depth, and we've achieved that in a way which is tasteful and which suits the plan and the vibe of the song that we set out in the beginning. The other thing that's interesting playing it back as well is that in certain moments of the song, that extra low end depth really sounds great, and maybe in the parts where it's like the verses are a bit more sparse, they require less low end. And this is a great way of adding impact to certain sections and to give the mix the feeling that it lifts is by bringing more of that sub feeling in the choruses and the bigger sections to elevate the mix. So that's something that we'll look at as we go and we progress through this mix, is using the low end and that low end platform to open up the mix in certain parts and give the feeling that the mix is moving forward and becoming more dreamy and more open. But we'll come to all of this later on. So hopefully that was useful. I encourage you to go and try some of this stuff on your own mixes and see what a difference it can make to your tracks. If you want to get hold of this template and get access to everything that I've shown you in this video today, you can grab it right now on the link in the description below for free. Next week, we're going to be moving this mix forward even more, so make sure that you come back for that. In the meantime, if you haven't caught up on the rest of the series, you can do so right now on this playlist, and I'll see you next time.